On September 27, 2020, Azerbaijan and Armenia, two countries nestled in the South Caucasus Mountains, went to war with one another over land that they both coveted.
Get out!
The gently sloping hills and mountainous peaks of Nagorno-Karabakh have long been a geopolitical flashpoint. And this is an area at the crossroads of ancient empires. And multiple wars forged in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Azerbaijan sees the region as an integral part of its people's history, but so do the Armenians, who established an unrecognized state that they call Artsakh. But in the course of 44 days of heavy, brutal combat, Azerbaijan was able to regain most of the territory that it had lost to Armenia in the First Karabakh War 30 years ago. But it came at a heavy cost. 2,800 Azerbaijani soldiers and over 3,000 Armenian soldiers were killed. And to gain more insight on what happened, we were granted unprecedented access into Karabakh by the Azerbaijani armed forces. Colonel Vakif is the military spokesman. I had last spoken to him a couple of months prior to the war, when he had warned that Azerbaijan was preparing for the eventuality of a major clash. Tell us a little bit about your military strategy and tactics and when you launched this operation.
Əməliyyatlar başlayandan sentyabr ayının 27-sindən sonra silahlı qüvvələrimiz, Azərbaycan ordusu bütün cəbhə boyu hücuma keçdi. Əks hücum idi, çünki ilk növbədə düşmən tərəfi bizim mövqeləri atəşə tuturdu və Azərbaycan ordusu bu düşmən mövqelərinin susturulması üçün, Azərbaycan insanlarının, şəxsi heyətin təhlükəsini təmin etmək üçün biz əks hücum əməliyyatına keçməyə məcbur olduq və ilk növbədə bu istiqamətdə düşmənin uzun illərdən bəri yaratdığı mühəndis istehkam qurğuları var idi. Xətləri var idi, hansılar ki keçmək çox çətindir, yarmaq çox çətindir. Amma Azərbaycan ordusu bütün gücünü qoyaraq məsələni həyata keçirdi, icra etdi. Ordumuz qısa bir müddətdə tanklarla, digər zirehli texnikalarla hücuma keçərək, artilleriyanın dəstəyi ilə hücuma keçərək bütün əraziləri, bu istiqamətdə olan əraziləri düşmənlərdən azad etdi. Əməliyyatlar, sizə deyim, əvvəl bir dağlıq ərazidə və aran ərazidə keçirildi. Aran ərazi o idi ki, Araz çayı boyu olan bir ərazilər idi. Bu, İranla həmsərhəd olan ərazilər. Burada heç şübhəsiz ordu daha çox döyüş texnikasından, tanklardan və digər zirehli texnikalardan istifadə edirdi. Amma dağlara qalxdıqca heç şübhəsiz hərbi qulluqçularımızın uzun illər boyu hazırlaşdığı, keçdiyi o treninqlər var idi və bu da xüsusi olaraq çox vacib idi. Şuşa ətrafında həyata keçirilən əməliyyat və digər istiqamətlərdə həyata keçirilən əməliyyatlar xüsusi hazırlanmış əməliyyatlardır və bunu da inşallah tarix özü göstərəcəkdir.
Azerbaijan's military offensive, by all accounts, caught the Armenians by surprise. And once the Azerbaijani army consolidated control of the strategic cities of Fuzuli, Hadrut, and Jibril in the southern part of Nagorno-Karabakh, a daring special forces operation was launched to capture the city of Shusha. Heavy urban warfare ensued, and by November 7th, Azerbaijan was in full control of the city of Shusha and the strategic Lachin corridor. The Armenian military faced the prospects of total collapse. Russia, which had been supplying the Armenians with plane loads of weapons during the conflict, has deployed troops on the ground to monitor the Kremlin-brokered settlement between Azerbaijan and Armenia that ended the war. And Azerbaijan's highly effective use of drones and sensors had proved decisive. Military officials tell us that their tactic was to essentially go around these fortifications. That, in combination with the Azerbaijani extensive use of drones, essentially rendered these fortifications obsolete. And with the war now over, Azerbaijani officials have to figure out how to rebuild amidst the devastation.
Fuzuli is part of Azerbaijani culture. It's an Azerbaijani land. And Fuzuli is one of the prosperous regions of Azerbaijan used to be before the occupation. And unfortunately, as a result of Armenia's occupation that lasted more than 28 years, that we see everything has been destroyed and everything has been razed to the ground. And you see the level of destruction. There is no solid building. When Fuzuli was liberated, Azerbaijani soldiers had a difficulty to find one solid building to put an Azerbaijani flag. Unfortunately, nothing has been left. For Fuzuli was also a city home to 100,000 Azerbaijanis, and it was, in a sense, a cultural center for the plain Karabakh part of wider Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. But after Armenia's occupation, Azerbaijan will start a grandiose transformation process.
On our way here, we saw a number of heavy Armenian fortifications, underground fortification. How difficult was it for your military to recapture this area, and what was the strategy going in?
Militarily, it was not easy, and Armenia has built within a huge fortification system reminiscent of the Second World War. Entire southern front of Armenian armed forces, they relied too much on their fortification systems, but Azerbaijan can't pass it, but we did it. Of course, there was an element of the surprise. Every military operation should combine different elements, including the elements of the surprise, but also elements of better application of the modern technology and also better tactics.
The Martian landscape of what was once the line of contact separating the two armies was a stunning testimony of how this conflict had deeply scarred the otherwise eerily breathtaking countryside scenery of Karabakh. Well, we're now in the city of Agdam, or at least what's left of it. There's literally not a single building that's been left untouched after 30 years of intermittent war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, the Armenian separatists that were here were forced just out of the city just a little over a day ago. And it is nothing but rubble and destruction. The Azerbaijani government is trying to rebuild the road that leads into the city. And right behind me is a mosque that was desecrated by the Armenians. The government now in Azerbaijan is trying to refurbish and rebuild. But looking from the vast amount of destruction all around us, it really does seem as if a nuclear bomb had hit the city. It's going to be a tough task ahead for the Azerbaijani government that's vowed to rebuild and resettle the Azerbaijani civilians that once lived here. The return to Agdam resurfaced old wounds and bitter memories. Reza Degadi is an internationally acclaimed photojournalist. He's an ethnic Azerbaijani born in the city of Tabriz in Iran. And he happened to be in this very same spot in Agdam 30 years ago as the bodies of the victims were brought in from one of the most infamous massacres committed at the time. In the early 1990s, the photos that Reza took of Azerbaijani villagers fleeing the village of Khojali as Armenian militias advanced documented an atrocity that the Armenian government attempted to cover up.
30 years ago, this was one of the most beautiful cities in the Caucasus, here actually. And I spent a week here living in one houses and photographing every day exactly the place that we have standing. Hundreds of the people that had fled the massacre of Khojali, and they were gathering here because just in front of the mosque, this rubble that you see, it was the morgue here. And the International Red Cross, they were bringing the bodies of the people that they were killed in the Khojali. Hundreds of the people all around here, and gathering. There was a coffins here built, a wooden coffin, exactly in the same alley, like hundreds of the coffin, and they were using as soon as the bodies were arriving and putting in the coffin there.
And as we drove deeper into Karabakh, it became clearer the haste in which some Armenian units withdrew. One such abandoned Armenian military base was still full of ammunition when we visited. Just days prior, Armenian soldiers were living, eating, and fighting here. Even family photo albums were hastily abandoned. The owner, now long gone. The 1st Motorized Rifle Regiment of the Armenian military used to be based here in the strategic city of Hadrut. But by October 9th, Around 200 Azerbaijani Special Forces soldiers had infiltrated the city from the surrounding hills and mountains. By October 10th, the Azerbaijani army was in full control of the strategic city, essentially bypassing a string of fortifications the Armenian military had built around this area in southern Karabakh. Now, this entire area is back in the hands of the Azerbaijani military, forcing the Armenians to sign a humiliating capitulation. The Armenians burned down much of the houses in other parts of Karabakh when they were forced to withdraw. But here in the city of Hadrut, whose capture marked a turning point in the war, the collapse of Armenian military positions came so suddenly that most of the infrastructure remained intact. Hadrut's Armenian church is now empty. It's uncertain whether its worshippers will ever return. And like all wars, this one had its own underlying complexity. Azerbaijan is a majority Muslim country, and Armenia almost entirely Orthodox Christian. And it is easy to paint this conflict as having religious dimensions. But Azerbaijanis see that theirs is a multi-confessional country. And here in Ganja, Azerbaijan's second largest city, the Alexander Nevsky Russian Orthodox Church, which was named after a patron saint who fought and defeated German Teutonic invaders, worshippers practice their faith freely. And though Ganja is far removed from the front lines, the city was targeted on multiple occasions by Armenian ballistic missiles. As Armenian troops lost ground, the missile attacks were seen as a desperate last-ditch effort to try to expand the war beyond the Karabakh front. Homes in the center of the city were struck in the middle of the night. Families buried under the rubble. And Armenia's missiles rained down throughout Azerbaijan's countryside. About an hour's drive south of Ganja is a small, sleepy town called Barda, which was also hit a number of times. This is a relatively poor area where people are mainly farmers and laborers. The war took a particularly heavy toll here. We went to Barda to speak with the father of one of the youngest victims. On October 27th, his daughter, Aysu Iskandarova, was mortally wounded when an Armenian missile struck while she was playing outside with her friends. He is still struggling to make sense of his loss.
Mən işdə olan vaxtı, yəni atamla işdəydik. Gördük göydə partlayış səsi gəldi. Getdim elə aradan gördüm ki, bizim çəpər yanır. Həyət yanır. Yürüdüm evə, yoldaşımı çağırdım, qışqırdım, hey verən yoxdur. Mən getdi. Uşağın deyə bu tərəf böyrü paralanıb, tökülüb yerlə bir idi. Qucağıma aldım ki, maşına qoyam, aparam banızıya, töküldü yerə. Yəni uşaq da ki, son vaxtlar mənə çox işlər deyirdi. Deyirdi ki, ata, kətdə müəllimə vardı, məktəblər bağlıdır. Deyirdi ki, ata, mən apar hazırlığa, qonşunun qız da gedir. Deyirdi, ata, mənlə. Dedim ki, o qadınım, işlərimi qutarım, aparıb qoyacağım. Nə bilim, belə uşaq idi, nə bilirdi ki, o arzuları çox idi. Allah haqqı ağladım həmən gecə. Həmən gənciyə düşən axşamı ağladım mən. Dedim, bax, bu uşaq yatıb, onun günahı nədir? Sonra da, nə bilim, valla, yaxşı idi. Burada kətdə də deyirdi ki, bizim kəndə yəni belə bir şey düşüb eləyər, yəni. Sonra da gəldi, onlara baxdım, öz başıma gəldi.
Almost every family we met in Azerbaijan had a story of loss to tell, whether from this latest war or from the first one 30 years ago. The fight for Karabakh has been a multi-generational war. The soldier was wounded on the front line, not far from where his grandmother was forced to flee advancing Armenian militias from the first Karabakh War.
Voyinkomatdan zəng elədilər, səfərbərlikdən. Zəng elədilər ki, bəs ayın 21-i voyinkomata gəl. Mən də həmin günü ayın 21-i getdim. Mənə yazdılar səfərbərlik, amma mən hələ bilmirdim, orada dəqiq bilmirdim ki, yəni döyüş nə vaxt başlayacaq, döyüş nə zaman olacaq. Heç bir məlumatım yox idi. Sadəcə bizi göndərdilər, getdik biz 777 nömrəli hərbi hissəyə. Orada bizə təlim keçdilər. Bizlə çox gözəl rəftar elədilər hamısı. Təlimlər keçəndən sonra biz getdik, bölündük hərbi hissəmizə. Hərənin öz bir vəzifəsi oldu. Hərbi hissəyə bölünəndən sonra bizə dedilər ki, biz dağlarda təlim keçəcəyik, dağlarda məşqlər, dağa qalxma, qaçma. Səhər saatlarında 27-si radələrində, sentyabrın 27-si bizim döyüşümüz başladı. 27-si axşam saatlarında mən yaralandım. Yaralanandan sonra məni təxliyə elədilər, mən istəmirdim gəlmək. Hətta mənim öz əsgər yoldaşım da var idi. Biz 1 il 6 ay bir yerdə xidmət elədik. Amma o şəhid oldu. Mən çox üzüldüm onun şəhid olmağına. Həqiqətən də o qardaş kimi idi mənə. Biz çiyin-çiyinə vuruşurduq orada. Murov dağında biz döyüşə başlayanda, yəni mən bilirdim ki, ora atamgilin torpağıdır, nənəmgilin torpağıdır. Bir söz var, deyir 1992-ci ildə anasının qucağında gələn uşaqlar indi tank belində Qarabağa gedir. Bu həqiqətən də düz oldu. Yəni biz bunu gördük.
Garatel Habibova became a refugee when she was forced from her home in the district of Kalbajar in Karabakh in 1993.
Erməni üstə gələndə biz qaçmışdıq. Kəlbəzərə gəldik, oradan da maşın gəldi, bizi götürdük, qaçdıq. Gəldik Sələkdar, ora gələndə baxdıq ki, orada istədik oradan keçək. O balaca vertolyotlar, mən də bilmirəm. Onlar belə başım üstünə gələndə gördüm arvadlar çağa daldı, hamısı belə üzü quyulu ölübdü. Üzü quyulu bax belə yıxılıb, hamısı ölübdü. Çoxlu qar yağırdı. Uşaqlar gəldi, papaqlar yerləndi çaya. Uşaqlar geri çıxarda bilmədi. Heç nə götürməmişdik, heç nə. Sırpa qaçmışdıq, sırpa. Allah'a akbar.
Her home, Kalbajar, was handed by Armenia back to Azerbaijan as part of the settlement concluding the Second Karabakh War. The cycle of tragedy and triumph, of displacement and return, has been a unique hallmark of this conflict. On the Armenian side, the war's outcome has been an unmitigated disaster. Protesters crowded the streets of the capital, Yerevan, calling for the ouster of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan.
Наше требование то, что сейчас мы не согласны того, что вот эти земли просто так отдали. Мы не будем отдавать, будем воевать до конца. И мы не хотим, что так дальше продолжало наше руководство руководить нашим городом, нашим родиной.
So what really triggered the war? What drove Armenia and Azerbaijan to the brink? I spoke with Brenda Schaefer, an expert on the South Caucasus and a research professor at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. She travels regularly to the region. I caught up with her in Baku.
Part of the Armenians' clearly articulated strategy of new wars for new territories. So according to this doctrine, which 2 years ago he rolled out, he said that, that Armenia has to attack Azerbaijan in new fronts and take new territories so that Azerbaijan will be deterred from fighting them in Karabakh and in the occupied territories. Clear Azerbaijan had to push back and had to push back in the places actually where Armenia was vulnerable, which was the occupied territories. They thrust themselves into war instead of building their state. During the Zurich protocols, Turkey had offered Armenia, if they would withdraw from just one district, that they would open up the border and trade with them. And Armenia even rejected withdrawing from one district. That trade with Turkey could have brought Armenia so many benefits.
The geopolitical balance of the Caucasus has now inexorably shifted. Armenia, which had long been a Russian client state, was defeated by an Azerbaijani force that had sought to shed its Soviet past and to look to the West for partners like Turkey and Israel to upgrade its weaponry and improve its military doctrine.
All the Russian supplies went through Iran, either by air or through the Caspian port. This was the first real war of the 21st century where on one hand it was two states, not just wars where there's a power trying to deal with some sort of non-state actor. but also the technology, and drones really integrated into the front, sort of the strength of Turkish and Israeli weapons.
For some perspective on how Azerbaijan now views the new military landscape, I spoke with Dr. Farid Shafiev, a former Azerbaijani diplomat and chairman of the Center of Analysis for International Relations in Baku. I asked him about Russia's role and the next steps for Azerbaijan.
I would like to hope that Moscow also realizes that, those kind of the footprint cannot last forever. For all these years, 27 years of occupation, Azerbaijan, never reconciled with the fact of occupation. We've been told that, we have to accept fait accompli, the status on the ground. We did not. And even after 5 years, if something will happen, and Azerbaijan sovereignty and control won't be restored over the rest of the territory, Azerbaijan will work towards that end too, and will restore its territorial integrity, its full sovereignty eventually.
So it's not over?
It's not over, yes. Traditionally, Russia was here for 200 years, but Azerbaijan has also very, very strong ties with Turkey, the neighboring power, regional power.
But Turkey and Russia are not the only countries with vested interests in this part of the world. Azerbaijan also shares a long border with Iran, and along with it, complicated relationship. With a large and oftentimes restive ethnic Azerbaijani population of their own, Iranian authorities have throughout the years attempted to suppress Azerbaijani nationalist sentiment. So I'm speaking now with an activist, an ethnic Azeri activist in what the Azerbaijanis call Güney Azerbaijan, southern Azerbaijan, which is actually located in the territory of Iran, to get his perspective on how the Azeris in Iran have reacted to the war. For his safety, we're going to refer to him by Emir. That's not his real name. He's been imprisoned on a number of instances by the authorities in Iran for his activism on behalf of ethnic Azeris, which form around 20% of the population of Iran. Emir, thank you so much for speaking with us. So tell us, what has been the reaction from ethnic Azeris in Iran to the war in Karabakh?
Azerbaycan konusu gelsiniyle bağımlı. Bir de ısrar ettiğinde ne vardı Azerbaycan konusu gelsin bir de bizde vardı. Bize bir tavırış verildi. O tavırışta çoklu lanet görmüştüler, çoklu polis görmüştüler. Ona göre hakim seçildiği orada seçilmek için, tezahürat geçirmek için, şöyle bilmek için, slogan atmak için Iran'ın toplumunu tuttular. Onunla bir şey olmadı, bir ses çıkmadı. Dedim günlükte bunlar yerli değil, sokaktan tutulur. Ve sokaktan onunla zabırmışlar. Burada güvenlik güçler zabırmışlar. Ki gelmeyin arasına, keser tutacağız ve toplumda tutkuna koymadılar bir de.
The regional impact of the war will no doubt reverberate for some time. And to find out if their newfound victory in Karabakh could open the door to some reconciliation, I spoke with Rafika Mamedova, an Azerbaijani journalist who has participated in past Track 2 dialogue meant to foster mutual understanding with her Armenian counterparts.
There is still some pain and hurt among Azerbaijanis toward our neighbors. And it's not only because of the 30 years when our land were occupied, but also the losses experienced by our young people recently fighting for their homeland. So it will not happen overnight, it will take time, but that's possible. But first of all, I think Armenian side has to put aside their aggression and the territorial claims. My generation in both sides has more anger. We want that peace more than them because they lost.
Healing will be easier said than done. Well, the war in Karabakh is now over, but the leftovers of the fighting are everywhere. You can see here Armenian military uniforms thrown by the wayside here in Fuzuli, where a significant amount of the fighting in southern Karabakh took place. A reminder of the toll, of the heavy toll that took place on both sides. Now the question remains, can Azerbaijan and Armenia ever build a lasting peace? Yet so much remains unresolved, and so much pain remains left behind. If history has taught us anything, conflicts like this one in Karabakh have a way of making an even deadlier return.